This seminar will provide a summary of the relationship between current fund and the grant fund. Our speaker for this workshop is Bill Homa. Mr. Homa is the CFO and tax collector of the Township of Cedar Grove. He is a licensed CPA, RMA, CMFO, CTC, PSA, and QPA. Mr. Homa is also a past president of the GFOA and an active member in several professional associations. I would like to thank Mr. Homa for being here today, and please make sure to scan your badge for CEU credits. Thank you.
All right. Good to see everybody this morning. I know when I was president of GFOA, we did an early bird at 7:30. And we used to do a twilight at 7:30 at night. How many people would like to get to 7:30 back? Nope. 2.5 people are ready for 7:30 in the morning. And we used to do a twilight. But the problem with the twilight, everybody, when I read the evaluations, everybody wanted an open bar at the twilight. So that also kind of got nixed. I know, I've got Mr. Steinberg in the back. I've got to try and teach him something today. I don't know if that's possible. But he knows everything, so, anyhow. Well, welcome. What I decided to do this morning was do something on grant accounting. They called me, to do my early bird. I'm so excited to be back here again. So, and it's mornings with Bill. It's like Morning Joe, mornings with Bill. So what I wanted to do was, I'm going to go through some of the bullet points dealing with grant accounting initially, and then we'll look at some journal entries. How many people love journal entries? That's what it's all about. For every debit, there's an offsetting credit. It doesn't get better than that. So we're going to look at some journal entries in a little bit, moving grants from the current fund over to the state and federal grant fund, and maybe at the tail end, I'm going to bring up a couple financial statement schedules. I know I'm really disappointed if you heard yesterday with Cynthia, after 41 years of doing financial statements, I finally memorized all the sheet numbers. And no more are they going to be like sheet 5, the trial balance, and sheet 11, the appropriated reserve. So everything does change, but hopefully it does change for the better. Okay? I'm going to first go over some bullet points dealing with grants at this point. All these slides, gang, they want to go green because there's going to be like green purchasing later. So they don't want you to photocopy anything anymore. So everything will be up on the website after we do get done, okay? Just some bullet points here dealing with grants. All grants must be appropriated in the current fund municipal budget unless they're for capital projects, okay? Always remember, municipalities have 3 ways to spend money. Right? Has to be either through the municipal budget, dedication by rider, or a capital or a bond ordinance. It's got to be through one of those mechanisms. And if you heard Valerie yesterday here from Nitzavachi in the audit, one of the things they look for is in your trust fund, when you're spending money out of trust, they want to make sure it's all dedicated by rider. All the resolutions are in place. Okay? So granted, you can have trust funds, you can have your grants running through, your utility funds. But I'm really focusing in on current fund today, okay? So just realize, all our grants, anytime we do spend monies against our grants, they're all run through the current fund budget at this point. Either they're inserted in the budget prior to our adoption, or if we get a check during the year, we're going to do a Chapter 159 for that and insert that into the budget, okay? So basic rule dealing with grants, obviously everything's running through the budget. There are some exceptions. Community development block grants, okay, are an exception and will continue to be dedicated by rider. Usually with myself, look, I've been in Cedar Grove for 35 years. Getting close to retirement one of these days, 35 and a half years. But I enjoy what I do. Seriously, gang, where would we get this fun day in and day out? Is it me or what? I'm also the tax collector dealing with taxpayers. Now I'm going to go to the seminar later on SALT, so I've got to find out about the charitable deductions. But again, community development block grants, all dedicated by rider at this point. So I run them through trust. Just a suggestion with community development block grants that I've run into. I'm just sharing you my own experiences. Sometimes we will pay the vendor ahead of time before we get reimbursed from the county. One of the rules that I've always do is if I give that check to the vendor, before I get reimbursed from the county, I always call the county first. I have a contact person in Essex County. Make sure that they have all the necessary paperwork from the vendor so the municipality can get reimbursed. Okay, make sure they have the county has the payroll timesheets, maintenance bonds, whatever they need for us to get reimbursed from the county. So I'm all over that. So I call Mike Woods in Essex County. He'll tell me, no, the vendor's missing this, this, and this. I won't give the vendor the check, because once you give that vendor the check, they're not going to hustle. I've learned that from experience, okay? So if you are paying some of your vendors early with community development block grants, make sure they got all the paperwork ahead of time. DOT grants. Many of us deal with Department of Transportation grants, which I use. DOT grants may be appropriated in the current fund budget or as part of a bond ordinance. You can do it either way, okay? Many times I'll run it through current, I'll have the anticipated revenue, I'll have the offsetting appropriation in the current fund budget. Lately, I've been just putting it as regular part of the bond ordinance, and the receivable will be set up in the general capital fund, okay? Word of advice, DOT grants, always remember, you can get 75% of the lesser of the grant award or the contract amount, okay, from DOT. So I'm on top of that. I see the governing body at our council meeting awarding a contract under DOT. That week, I'm working on getting the paperwork down to Newark for us to get reimbursed. So stay on top of that. I'm going to have a slide in a little bit that you've got to stay on top of your receivables with these grants, okay? And we'll hit that bullet point in a little bit, okay? So these are just some basics dealing with grants. Got to be run through your budget, all right? Some community development block grants, dedication by rider. DOT grants can be part of your current fund budget or part of a bond ordinance, okay? Let's talk about our current fund budget at this point. Many times, obviously, when you look at your budget document, you look at the revenue section of your budget document for the grants, you'll see the grant amount, and they're always realized in cash in full. They're always realized in full, even though you haven't raised the money yet. You haven't collected all the money, okay? Because we make a journal entry for that, and we're going to be seeing that. So kind of the next bullet point, you know, the anticipated revenue for each grant will be immediately realized in cash in the current fund municipal budget. And we'll be making journal entries. You're going to see an entry for that in a little bit. Because ultimately, we're realizing the grant in full, and we're going to be moving over to the grant fund to set up the receivable. So that's why if you look at your current fund budget, you see the total amount of the grants on the revenue side, everything's realized in full because we've moved that grant over to the state and federal grant fund, okay? We also do that on the appropriation side of the grant, okay? The budget appropriation for each grant will be immediately charged out in the current fund municipal budget, okay? So same thing on the appropriation side. If you look at all your grants in the appropriation side of the budget, you'll see the amount adopted, the modified column, everything's been fully paid or charged, nothing in the reserve column, because everything has been moved over to the state and federal grant fund. We're going to be seeing the buzzword, we've set up the appropriated reserve for that in the state and federal grant fund. So realistically, at this point in time, we're pretty much done with current fund. We're out of the current fund. The grant has been realized in full. The appropriation has been charged out in full. Now what we're going to be doing ultimately is moving over to the state and federal grant fund. And we're going to be accounting for this grant in the state and federal grant fund, okay? So now I'm over in the grant fund. Each grant will be separately recorded in the state and federal grant fund. And the grant receivable and the spending, the appropriated reserve, I put that in caps because that's a key word, appropriated reserve, will be established for each grant. So now we're over in the grant fund, we're going to set up the receivable for it, and ultimately we're going to be doing a financial statement schedule, which I finally memorized, is sheet 11. It's not going to be sheet 11 anymore. And sheet 12 is going to be the appropriated reserve financial statement schedule. These are all grants that have been run through the current fund budget, appropriated, or have been appropriated via Chapter 159, okay? So right now, we are over in the state and federal grant fund. We've got the receivables set up. We're going to see the journal entries for that in a bit. and we're going to see the appropriated reserve set up for each grant. And we keep accounting for that. I have a separate fund. I have on my computer, in my budget report, I have a separate section for the grants. All of my appropriated reserves, I give them their own appropriation number. I can run a report. I can see what the balance is in any of my grants when I run my budget report. So each one is accounted separately on my budget report in the grant fund, okay? Next thing we're going to be doing, if there's a local match, because the example we're going to be looking at in a little bit will be Municipal Drug Alliance. I think everyone has Municipal Drug Alliance, and that's usually a 25% match. So that's why I picked on Municipal Drug Alliance. But if there is a local match for that grant, the local matching share for each grant must be dispersed from the current fund municipal budget to the state and federal grant fund. Because in the grant fund, we're going to spend the total amount for the grant, and part of it's going to be the state share, part of it's the local share. So that local share gets dispersed from current fund over to the state and federal grant fund, okay? So we have the receivable in the grant fund, we've got the appropriated reserve, the full amount of the grant in our grant fund, but that local share has to be sent over to the state and federal grant fund, okay? Next bullet point. All cash advances to the state and federal grant fund come from the current fund budget. You know, pretty much this doesn't happen in practice, but think about it. Municipal Drug Alliance, suppose that's your only grant. I know up in Essex County, we spend the money first. And then after the quarter's over, we submit the expenditure report, we submit the voucher, we get reimbursed. So think about it. If that's your only grant, where are you getting the cash from to pay those bills during the quarter? So if that's your only grant, we'd have to advance some cash from the current fund to the grant fund to cover those expenditures until we get reimbursed from the county for our grant after the quarter is over. So we put in this bullet point that in case you don't have enough of cash in your state and federal grant fund, you run out of cash, you do have to advance the cash from the current fund. Okay, so just be aware of that. Pretty much doesn't happen too much in practice because you've got other monies in your grant fund, you know, body armor grant, DWI, drunk driving enforcement fund grant monies that are sitting there, recycling tonnage grant monies that are sitting there. So that's pretty much maybe a moot point, but just be aware of it. If you do run out of cash, money is advanced from the current fund budget, okay? Next bullet point. When we do get grant money in that gets close to the end of the year, okay? All cash receipts for state and federal grants not appropriated in the current fund budget will be recorded as an unappropriated reserve. Key word, there's a separate financial statement. Sheet 12 of the financial statements that we do are for all of our unappropriated reserves, okay? And these would be recorded in our state and federal grant fund. Many times in practice, you know, we might get a body armor grant monies in, we might get recycling tonnage grant monies in, maybe in November, sometimes in early December. You know, you're not going to immediately run out and do a Chapter 159 for it. So if I get some grant monies late in the year, I might not immediately do the Chapter 159 for it. I'm going to make a journal entry in my state and federal grant fund or a cash entry. Debit cash, credit the unappropriated reserve. And this will go on sheet 13 of the financials. And then next year when I put the budget together, I'm going to insert that grant that was unappropriated reserve into the municipal budget. Okay? So you could get unappropriated reserves simply means grants haven't been run through the current fund budget yet. Okay? So just be aware of that. That'll go on sheet 13 of the financials. Important. Gang, if you get anything out of this seminar, and I can't tell you, I've been teaching for 30 years, probably more than that. You know, it amazes me when I talk to colleagues, conferences, wherever, they get a new job at their own municipality, they look at the appropriated reserves, financial statement schedule, audit report, there's nothing left in the appropriated reserves, which means they spent all the money. That's all nice. Then they look at the receivable side of it, and guess what? They've got all these receivables sitting there, meaning someone just didn't submit the proper paperwork to the appropriate agency to get reimbursed. You've got to stay on top of the grant receivables. It's too easy to just, you know, lose sight of it. You know, the appropriated reserve is there. Let's spend all the money. Okay, that's great. But are you on top of the receivables? I know. I've had trouble in Cedar Grove. My goodness, I had a recreational trails grant for $15,000 in Cedar Grove, constantly calling the state, where's my 15 grand? Guy kept saying, your paperwork's at the bottom of the pile. Okay. 2 weeks later, call again. Where's my paperwork? It's in the bottom of the pile. And I would say, Fred, can you please move it to the top of the pile? You know what I'm saying? You've got to stay on top of the grant receivables. It's important. There's a lot of cash out there that, our municipality's entitled to. And, I can't stress that enough, and I've just kind of seen that through practice and over the years, okay? Stay on top of your grant receivables. Last thing, dealing with some of the teaching points here. Normally, like Municipal Drug Alliance grant, I'll be honest with you, we don't spend every penny out of our Municipal Drug Alliance grant each year. So, we realistically, when we have a grant expenditures, 80% goes against the grant, 20% goes against the local share. So usually, after the grant period's over, I still have some local monies sitting in the state and federal grant fund for Municipal Drug Alliance. And what I do is I return that money back to current fund. So if I see, and I'm on top of, obviously all my grants, but Municipal Drug Alliance, just picking on that one because that has a local share. If I do see local share money that's still outstanding, we haven't spent for that applicable grant, I will return it back to current fund. I'll pick it up as Myrna, back in current fund, okay? So these are all my teaching points with grants, okay? And obviously, since we're doing grant accounting, what I wanted to do was, and we're a bunch of accountants, let's get into a couple journal entries, okay? And I have a slide for each journal entry, and again, this will be up on the website, and I think many times, and grants accounting is important. I think, I teach the review class for the state exam. Most of my calls deal with grants. It's incredible. And even if, for many of you, obviously, we're all certified, the last 2 state exams, there was a grant accounting worksheet on the state exam. So you've got to know the journal entries. It's out there. It's being tested by the state. You need to know it, okay? So what I decided to do was, I decided to put, I picked Municipal Drug Alliance grant mainly because of the fact we do have a local share for that, okay? We got a local share. So let's, in our own mind's eye, we've got our current fund budget, and on the revenue side of our current fund budget, we got the state share anticipated as a revenue for $20,000, okay? And we're going to have to put up a 25% match, which will be $5,000 in a minute, okay? So, in your own mind's eye picture, revenue side, $20,000, appropriation side, $25,000, okay? Appropriation side, we got the state share of $20,000, we got the local share being $5,000, okay? So pretty much this what might look like in your budget document, if you will. I kind of, show the entries for this to record, the Municipal Drug Alliance grant, in your current fund budget, we would debit the anticipated revenue. And I kind of abbreviated, that's Municipal Drug Alliance grant, I kind of abbreviated MDAG as Municipal Drug Alliance grant. So we have the anticipated revenue in our current fund budget of 20. I called it revenue general because the local taxpayers are putting up the 5,000. That can come from the amount to be raised by taxation, receipts from delinquent taxes, could be a miscellaneous revenue. The taxpayers are putting up the other 5,000. And on the appropriation side of our budget, we have Municipal Drug Alliance, state share 20,000, local share 5,000, okay? So that's the way we've adopted the budget, anticipated revenue, and the appropriation side, okay? So from one of our teaching points we just had, in current fund, we're going to realize the revenue, and we're going to charge out the appropriation. And when we do that, we're going to run it through an interfund account in current fund, you're going to see in a second, due to from the state and federal grant fund. So how about let's realize this revenue? And again, when we realize the revenue, we're going to be crediting it, okay? So we'll credit the anticipated revenue in our current fund by crediting the revenue. This way, when you look at your budget document, you got the anticipated revenue, everything is realized in full in cash, so we'll credit that. And we're debiting the interfund account due to from the grant fund. And you're going to see in a minute the reason why we're doing that. It's ultimately going to force us to set up a payable to the grant fund for the local share. We'll see that in a second, okay? So at this point, one of our teaching points was to realize the grant in full by crediting it, running it through the interfund account, due to from the grant fund. And how about now, at this point, let's charge out the appropriation in current fund, okay? And the way we charge out our appropriation is by debiting the appropriation in full, the full $25,000. And again, we're going to run it through the interfund account due to from the grant fund. So if you notice right here, we've debited the due to from grant fund for 20. Here we've credited it for 25, so ultimately we have a payable of $5,000, right? Due to the state and federal grant fund. That's the local share that has to be sent over to the state and federal grant fund. So right now, gang, we're pretty much done with current fund. The revenue's been realized in full, the appropriation's been charged out in full, and we've set up a payable to the grant fund for the local share, okay? So one of our next teaching points is, how about we set up the receivables in the state and federal grant fund? And we mentioned all these receivables will be on sheet 11 of the financial statements. We'll do a schedule for all of the state grants receivable, okay, in our financial statements. And if we have time, we'll bring that up, okay? Next thing we're going to be doing is, how about, okay, I went the wrong way, okay? Now we're in the state and federal grant fund, okay? At this point, one of our teaching points was to set up the receivables in our state and federal grant fund, okay? So we're going to do that for the Municipal Drug Alliance grant. Here, what we're going to be doing is, in our grant fund, in our general ledger, let's debit the receivable for that grant. So we'll debit Municipal Drug Alliance grant receivable, $20,000, credit due to from current, okay? Because ultimately we want to, in a minute, we're going to set up a receivable for current, a receivable from current in our state and federal grant fund for the local share, okay? So at this point, we've got the receivable set up for 20, running it through the interfund account, all right? So my general ledger, I'm debiting the receivable, 20, debit due to from current fund. Now what we want to do in our grant fund, how about we set up the appropriated reserve? We've got the receivable set up. Let's set up the spending account. And I give all of these spending accounts their own appropriation number in my budget report within the grant fund section of the budget report, okay? So at this point, let's set up the appropriated reserve. So at this point, again, we'll debit due to from current, because our goal here is to set up a receivable from current for the local share, and we'll credit the appropriated reserve, okay? Once it's run through our budget, we can immediately spend the money, right? And even when it's a Chapter 159, we can't spend that money until we've adopted the Chapter 159 resolution, okay? We all realize that. So again, between these two journal entries, here we have a due from current of 5, and previously we credited for 20. So at this point, we do have a due from current of $5,000, okay? So at this point, we're out of current fund. The revenue's been realized in full. The appropriation's been charged out. In the grant fund, we've set up the receivable for it. We set up the appropriated reserve, okay? So I think my next slide here is, how about we send that $5,000 over to the grant fund? They're looking for that money, okay? So in current fund, we're going to physically cut a check. We're going to move the cash from current fund over to the state and federal grant fund. So we cut a check out of current. Grant fund's looking for the local share. We'll credit cash, and we'll debit the due to from the grant fund. We've settled that interfund at this point, okay? Because originally it was set up as a due to the grant fund. They were looking for that $5,000. So cash gets dispersed over to the grant fund. All right. So now at this point we're going to have the $5,000 over in the state and federal grant fund. Okay. So in our grant fund, what we are doing is we are debiting cash at this point, $5,000, settling that interfund. All right. So at this point, all the activity is going to be handled in our state and federal grant fund. So right now the cash has been sent over. We're pretty much done with current fund. Everything's been realized. The appropriation's been charged out in full. All right. Let's take it one step further. I keep going the wrong way. How about at this point, imagine in your own mind, this is the only grant that's sitting in our state and federal grant fund. And we did receive $13,000 from the county for our Municipal Drug Alliance grant. This is what I'm trying to highlight, all right? $13,000 came in from our county. We're going to be debiting the cash, right, in our grant fund, crediting the receivable, all right? So all the activity, all the cash that's being collected against our receivables, all is going to be accounted for in the grant fund. So here we're debiting cash, crediting the receivable, all right? That's pretty easy. I wanted to take it one step further at this point. Suppose during the quarter we spent $24,000 in cash. We just mentioned, many of us in practice, we spend the Municipal Drug Alliance money first, right? And then we seek reimbursement from the county, okay? So in the previous slide, we collected $13,000 in cash from the county, kind of said, hey, let's get some cash in here. Remember, we had $5,000, which was the local share, but we spent $24,000, okay? What I'm trying to highlight in my next slide is we're going to have, in essence, you know, if you're going to, if this is, you had one checking account for your grant fund, you know, one of these banks are going to be calling you up that you're overdrawn, okay? We had $5,000 that came in from the local share. We had $13,000 that the county did send us. That gave us, at this point, $18,000, and we did spend $24,000 on the grant. So at this point, we have a shortfall, and we wouldn't have enough of cash to cover those expenditures in our grant fund. And what I was trying to highlight is the next teaching point is if you don't have enough of money in your grant fund, the money gets advanced from current fund, okay? So here, if I'm short and I've got to spend money against the grant in my grant fund, don't have enough of cash, we've got to advance some money from the current fund at this point, okay? So here, what I'm doing is I'm cutting a check out of current fund. If you know, in the previous slide, we were short $6,000. We had $5,000 local share, $13,000 was the grant, and we spent $24,000. In essence, if this is our only grant, we're going to be short $6,000. So the cash advance would actually come from the current fund budget, okay? So here we have a due from the grant fund of $6,000, and we're cutting cash from current fund to send it over, all right? In a slide that I'm going to bring up in a few minutes, you know, when we have due from another fund in current, do we need an offsetting reserve for that receivable? Yes, okay, and you're going to see that journal entry in a minute. So here we have due from current of $6,000. We're going to cut a check, send it over to the state and federal grant fund, okay? And the cash will be received in our grant fund because we have the shortfall. We'll debit cash, and ultimately this will be a due to current fund. So when we do get reimbursed from the county for our expenditures during the quarter, ultimately we're going to repay the current fund, the $6,000 advance, okay? So my next slide that I'm going to be bringing up here would be simply that anytime we do have a due from another fund in current, we need an offsetting reserve for the receivable, okay? So next, this is the cash coming over. And last thing that I do have here is anytime in current fund we do set up an offsetting reserve for our receivable, we've got to debit budget operations, okay? So when we credit the offsetting reserve for the receivable, we'll credit reserve for due from the grant fund, debit budget operations. Anytime we debit operations, is that going to increase or decrease surplus? Decrease surplus. That's not a good thing, okay? So these are all the entries that I highlighted dealing with current fund, moving the state and federal grant fund moving the grants over to the state and federal grant fund. Showed you all the entries, okay? And these will be up on our website. And in a few minutes, I'm going to bring up a couple financial statements. I have a PDF on that. But these were the schedules that we actually do for the state and federal grant fund, okay? Granted, all the sheet numbers are, you know, kind of, these were the good old days. But obviously, we're going to be doing, you know, a trial balance for the state and federal grant fund, okay, which used to be sheet 5. We'll still do that. Obviously, and I'm going to bring that up in a sec. We're going to be doing bank reconciliation, sheet 9 and 9A. I'll bring that up in a second. Important, I try to highlight a little bit earlier. When I do my financial statements at year end, I'm doing all, sheet 10 will be the state and federal grant funds receivable. Anything that I have a receivables listed there for any of my grants, if I see the money spent on the appropriated reserves, I'm questioning it. Why haven't we gotten the money in? Was something misposted? I'll talk to my assistant treasurer, Sue, did you see the receipt for this? And I'm all over those receivables. I can't stress that enough. But really with the state and federal grant fund, there's really only 5 schedules. We do the trial balance, we do the bank recs on sheet 9 and 9A, we do our state and federal grant fund receivables. We'll always list the opening balances, which we're going to show, I'll bring up in a sec. Opening balances and receivables will always agree with the previous year's audit report. So when you're doing your financial statements, always remember, your opening balances and your financial statements will always agree with the previous year's audit report. Has to. So we'll have our grant receivables listed there. We mentioned a little bit earlier our appropriated reserves, which is on sheet number 11. And then we're going to list there all of our open grants, okay? Opening balance from the audit, what came in through the budget, what came in through Chapter 159, what was spent, what's our ending balance in the appropriated reserves. And we did mention the unappropriated reserves, okay? Unappropriated reserves would be any grant money that we do receive prior to the end of the year, or maybe just an oversight during the year. The money was posted to the grant fund. We didn't do a Chapter 159 for it. Didn't run it through the budget. So it's an unappropriated reserve, okay? So I'm going to try to get over to if I could, some financial statement schedules, since we still have some time. All right, we'll just highlight. This pretty much came directly from the, whoops, if I can move this up. Can you move up? Maybe I have to drag it. These are financial statement schedules that, whoops, now it's decided to move. Sorry about that, gang. Okay, well, that's good enough, I think. I wish I had my overhead projector with slides. It's a lot easier. I know, I have about 200, I think I have about 4,000 transparencies, and I do have 2 overhead projectors. But I realize in life everything comes back, right? So I'm waiting for, these overhead projectors to come back, But, what I decided to do was as part of grant accounting, I decided to scan the financial statements schedules that we use in the financial statement course at Rutgers, okay? And pretty much, even though, I know we're moving to the fast financial statements, and I know that was a lot of fun this past year, doing the fast financial statements. But what I did was, in practice, it created a lot of work for me. Do we have anybody here from the state? Oh, good. It created a lot of work for me because what I decided to do was I did it really twice. I did the financial statements the traditional way on the financial statements. Then I had all the numbers on the financial statement document. Then I brought up the FAST, and I entered everything into the FAST. And I think if you heard my question yesterday, the thing that drove me crazy, I'm used to putting the numbers on the form and seeing it on the form. With this, you're putting it in on a number in the portal, and then you have to generate report to see if you put it in the right spot. And that drove me nuts, because I found out I put it in the wrong spot. Then I had to go back in and change it. So it took a lot of time. But what we're trying to do at Rutgers, to be honest with you, is teach the financial statements the way we've always been doing them. The schedules are still the same. Even when you printed out the fast financial statements, the schedules look exactly the same. It's just the page numbers now go up into 180 or something, They used to be like 60. Now I've got, page numbers, because I have 3 utilities in Cedar Grove. So I've got a heck of a lot more pages to print out. So now I'm up to like 143. And, but anyhow, regular trial balance, obviously we'd have cash checking. We talked about that. This would be sheet 5. And then we would have the state and federal grant fund receivable, and that would agree with sheet 10 of the financial statements. And usually the way we teach the financial statement schedules, we work from the latest schedule and work back to the trial balance, okay? And then if we had any, here we had a due to current of $200. So obviously in current fund, we would have a due from the grant fund. Usually when we do our financials at year end, make certain all our interfunds receivables, our interfunds are in agreement at year end, okay? So here we have a due to current. In current, we have to have a due from the grant fund of $200, okay? Then we do have our appropriated reserves of $10,000. That would go on sheet number 11, where we show all the grants that we've done Chapter 159s for, or have been run through the current fund budget. And our unappropriated reserve. These are grant monies we've gotten in, and we haven't run it through the budget yet. We didn't anticipate the revenue through the budget process. We didn't do a Chapter 159. Okay, so that's kind of a standard trial balance. Granted, we'll always do our bank recs. Okay, every fund you've done, you always do your bank reconciliation. Okay, and here we have the state and federal grant fund, and I guess the cash on hand would always be change funds or deposits in transit. So here we kind of made something up in this problem that we utilized. We had a deposit in transit of $2,000. So that's cash on hand. On deposit would agree with sheet 9A that I'll bring up in a second. That would be the money that's actually in your bank account on December 31st. And we do have outstanding checks of $13,006, and that foots across to our cash balance of $23,400. And that would agree with sheet 5, what's on our trial balance as far as the cash goes. Okay? Next financial statement schedule, if I can do this. Maybe I can just do this. All right, that's sheet 9A. We had $35,000 in Bailey National Bank, and obviously that did agree with the cash that was sitting on deposit. Okay, it was $35,000. We see that. Okay, let's go to our receivable page. Okay, whoops. Let me bring this up a little bit. Oh, it went too far. Okay, these are our receivables. Okay, and we would be listing all of our grants. I guess in the problem that we've been using, they had no beginning balance because all the grants were received. Here, what was realized during the year. Okay, these were all run through our current fund budget. Okay, this is the state and federal grant fund receivable. This is what we actually received in cash. Okay, and we kind of scroll to the ending balance. And if we can scroll to the ending balance. So it looks like for this grant, Trailblazer grant, we had like $1,500 receivable, Neighborhood Watch grant, $300. So that's what I was trying to highlight a little bit earlier, that if we have receivables on our financial statement at year end and the appropriated reserve money's been spent, where's the money? We should be getting reimbursed for it. So just stay on top of that. And for the bigger communities, that runs into, thousands and thousands of dollars. Need to stay on top of it, okay? Then we have the appropriated reserves, and these are all the grants that have been either run through our budget. Okay, we had no opening balances. These are all our grants. These have been appropriated in our current fund budget. And there's a separate column, 48:4-87. These are our Chapter 159s. Okay, so here, this is our appropriated reserves. Okay, whoops. I don't know why it does that, but I'll slide across, and I don't know why these pop-ups keep coming up, but anyhow, and then these would be our appropriated reserves. These are the balances in each of our grants, $5,000, $2,400, $6,000, and $2,000, okay? So these represent the balances in our appropriated reserves, and important, we had $15,000 as a balance in our appropriated reserves. Obviously, that's going to be on our trial balance, reserved for appropriated reserves, $15,000, okay? And our last schedule that we would have here would be the unappropriated reserves. Okay, we kind of mentioned that here. These would be all grants that we did receive cash for, but we just didn't run through the budget yet, okay, via Chapter 159. So it looks like here we had a manicures lawns grant. We had a $12,000 unappropriated reserve that was brought into the 16 budget. And then we got a pothole safety grant. We received that during 2016, but we didn't do a Chapter 159 for that yet, okay? And it would sit on, we do a financial statement schedule here for our unappropriated reserves. And we'll have a balance here at the end of the year, okay, of $15,000. That would agree with our trial balance reserve for unappropriated reserves, okay? So again, just wanted to highlight the financial statement schedules. They're important, even though we've moved to FAST, you know, the schedules are still the same. It's just the way we input them into the portal. The next slide that I just scanned was in Cedar Grove. We did earlier this year a Chapter 159 for the Clean Communities Grant, okay? And again, we all realize, you know, we still need a resolution when we have a Chapter 159, but we do the certification, okay? We've got to do this budget certification. And then when we submit the certification down to Trenton, you know, we scan the resolution and we attach the resolution to the certification, okay? But the reason why I bring up this grant is it always kind of drives me nuts. Do things drive you nuts at work? Sometimes, or just me? That's an accounting term. Like, you know, the state really is great. They give us this drop-down box, right? And it's clean communities. Now, you would think clean communities would be under what letter? C. No, you have to go under N to find clean communities. So every year, you know, some of these grants, you would think, why don't they just make it clean communities -NJ DEP? No, I'm like looking for C. Is it just me or what? Maybe I'm thinking too much logical. But every year when I do my Clean Communities grant, I got to remember, I got to do the drop-down box. It's all under N for NJ. Like, I don't know why they did that. But anyhow, you know, it is what it is. But here, you know, you will do the certification. I guess in Cedar Grove, we got a little over $21,000 for Clean Communities. And obviously, this would be the certification that we would submit to Trenton. And I think the last thing is I pretty much just wanted to include, you know, the resolution that I do in my own community. Because obviously, you need a resolution for the Chapter 159. And then ultimately, I scan it and send that down to the division. They will send it back after it is approved. This thing's starting to go haywire. After it is approved, you will get it back with the approved date, and I think normally George Carmona has his signature there, that it has been approved. And lastly, I do have my own resolution here in Cedar Grove, which I included, just dealing with the Clean Communities grant at this point. But, so if I can move that up a little bit. So that's my last point is dealing with the resolution. I've got 9:15. Any questions? Any questions? 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 Grants? Al Steinberg was the director of the Division of Local Governmental Services. I still have his magazine in. I have it framed on the wall in my office.
$50 million on his balance sheets. And it turned out that most of them never got reimbursed. So the county had to make up, over a period of time, $50 million out of taxpayer money because this guy was playing golf. So he's not employed in New Jersey anymore. But just want to make it clear that, you know, the schedules are one thing, but you got to look at them and you got to act on what the actual data says. So make sure you get your receivables in.
And that's what we try to highlight. How was his golf game, though, Al? Does it did handicap go down, or? Yeah, did you have a question?
This is related to a comment you mentioned about the FAST system. So basically what you're saying is, I assume you're going to do your financial statements on these sheets, and then use them as your input source.
That's the way I decided to tackle the fast this year. It was extra work. I did the financials, and to be honest with you, by me doing it this way, I felt really comfortable with the numbers. There was a glitch. If you have any utilities, there was a glitch in the program where on sheet 45 of the financial statements, it was coming up that I had a deficit in operations in my sewer utility. I didn't have a deficit in operations. There was a glitch in the FAST program. I called the help desk, I told them there was a glitch, and the only way I would know this glitch was because I did it first the way I've always done it. I called the help desk, I said, look, this is showing I got a $76,000 deficit in operations in my sewer utility. I do not have a deficit in operations. So the help desk told me put it in the notes section. Honest to God. You know, so in the notes section on FAST, I put a note, it's not right. I don't have a $76,000 deficit. Then this year, we were a review community. Then Cavell from the division calls me up. Bill, you don't have this $76,000 in your budget. I said, I know, it's not right. I don't have a $76,000. I'll scan you my financial statements that I prepared. So I sent her all the schedules, and then she came back, okay, you're right, there's no deficit. So I guess it was extra work, but I didn't know how else to really tackle to put these numbers in the portal. Because when I did like improvement authorizations, okay, I had sheet 35 in front of me. I had each improvement authorization, opening balance, what was appropriated this year, what was spent, ending balance, okay? So I guess I had my financials in front of me. I know they were right, and then I entered into FAST. It was a lot of extra work. And even I'm worried this year, if you listened to Cynthia yesterday, now we have to do it with the budget. Now they want to capture more information for the user-friendly budget, you know? And now we might have SALT coming in. I think maybe I might get like my retirement paper. You know, there's a lot coming at us, plus the day-to-day operational stuff. You know, maybe it's just me. I don't mean to vent, but it's just, and it doesn't seem to be a very fast, you know, process. I'm not trying to be, it's kind of play on words a little bit, but it doesn't seem to be a very fast process. But that's the way I tackled them. I did the financial. I plan on doing it the same way. Huh? Ray's telling me to retire. I plan on just doing them the same way, you know, doing the financials the way I've always done them, get them done, bring up the FAST, and then I can do it piecemeal, you know, enter the information, and then, you know, make sure, print it out or look at it, make sure it's what I'm looking for, and be happy with it. You know, because the other thing, even last year, and even Cynthia kind of talked about it, the thing that drove me nuts, we teach financial statements at Rutgers. We teach people how to do the trial balance, right? And I print out my current fund trial balance, and I've got cash at the bottom left-hand corner. And I've got my, you know, county taxes payable up on top. And I spent a day trying to correct this. I said, I can't show anybody this. My trial balance, the numbers are all over the place. You know, you take pride in what you do. And I didn't like it. So, be honest with you, what I put up on my website, the financials, I scanned my own financial statements and put up on the website. I didn't put the FAST financial statements. I don't know if the state would really want to hear that, but I put up my own financials on the website. I didn't use the FAST. Maybe it'll be different this year. Look, we're all in this together. We want a better product. It was rolled out, you know, for the first time, and I'm sure there's going to be. They've already made one real big improvement that I've seen over last year. Because how many people had utilities? You had utilities, if at least this year, they've already set up tabs. And I think Matt, who was here, the computer guru yesterday, they set up tabs for all the utilities, which was a big help. Because last year with the utilities, I would enter a number on sheet 48, hit save, and I go back to sheet 41. I got to scroll all the way down to remember where I was. And I said, this can't be right. And it was right. So anyhow, look, you got to, we all want a better product, and that's what we're all striving for. And I'm sure it'll be better this year. It was the first year. So I think Rutgers gave them input, and all the instructors gave the state input. So we all want a better product, and I'm sure we're going to achieve that. So that's the ultimate goal. All right, any other questions? All right, thank you so much.